In 2016, a researcher at the University of California was digging through boxes of old letters in a library archive when she found a paper trail that was never supposed to be seen. The letters were from the 1960s, between executives of something called the Sugar Research Foundation, the sugar industry's trade group, and a small team of scientists at Harvard. The arrangement they described was simple. The industry would quietly pay the scientists, about $50,000 in today's money, and the scientists would publish a review in one of the most prestigious medical journals on Earth, examining a question that terrified the sugar business. What is really causing America's explosion of heart disease? The review appeared in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1967. Its conclusion: the problem was fat, not sugar. Cut the fat. The payment was never disclosed. The journal didn't require it back then. And that conclusion, bought and paid for, helped steer nutrition advice for the next half-century, while the whole Western world dutifully cut fat, filled the gap with sugar, and got sicker. Now here is the part that should stop you cold. When that researcher published the letters in 2016, people were shocked, as if sugar had suddenly done something out of character. It hadn't. Hiding its costs is the most consistent thing sugar has ever done. For 500 years, this white crystal has run on a single business model: unbelievable sweetness on one side of the ledger, and unbelievable suffering on the other, kept carefully out of sight. The scientists in 1967 were not inventing the trick, they were inheriting it. So here is the question: how did a stalk of grass from a tropical island become the most demanded substance on Earth? Powerful enough to redraw maps, move 12 million human beings in chains, corrupt science itself, and end up hiding in plain sight in almost everything you ate today? The answer begins about 10,000 years ago, with people chewing on a plant. Sugarcane is a grass, a giant one, thick as your wrist, and it was first domesticated on the island of New Guinea. The people there chewed the raw stalks for the sweet juice, and for thousands of years, that was sugar, a local pleasure you had to bite. It spread slowly through Asia as a plant, not a product. The transformation happened in India, somewhere around 1,500 years ago, maybe earlier. Indian processors worked out how to press the cane, boil the juice, and crystallize it, turning perishable sweetness into something dry, hard, storable, and shippable. The Sanskrit word for those crystals was sharkara. Follow that word west through Persian and Arabic, and you arrive, almost unchanged, at sugar. The name on the bag in your kitchen is a fossil of that first invention. It was the Arab world that turned sugar into an industry. As Islamic empires expanded, they carried cane and crystallization with them into Persia, Egypt, North Africa, Spain. Arab agronomists built irrigation, refineries, plantations. There's an old line historians like to quote: "Sugar followed the Quran." By the Middle Ages, Egypt was producing sugar of legendary quality, and Europe, which had nothing sweeter than honey and fruit, first met sugar not as food, but as medicine. That's worth pausing on. For centuries in Europe, sugar was sold by apothecaries, by the ounce, like a drug. It was prescribed for fevers, coughs, stomach troubles. It was so rare and so expensive that it was a display of power. When the King of England managed to obtain a few pounds of it in the 1200s, it was worth recording. By the 1500s, wealthy Europeans were sculpting entire banquet centerpieces out of sugar. Castles, animals, coats of arms, edible monuments that existed purely to say, "I can afford this." Queen Elizabeth, the First of England, loved sugar so much that her teeth turned black. And here is the detail that tells you everything about what sugar meant then. Some fashionable ladies reportedly blackened their own teeth to imitate her, because rotten teeth meant you were rich enough to eat sugar. Tooth decay was a status symbol. That is how desirable this substance was before ordinary people could touch it. And that desire, bottomless, continent-wide, and willing to pay anything, is what turned sugar dark. Because there was exactly one problem with sugar as a business. Making it was hellish. Cane has to be crushed within hours of cutting, so plantations needed mills running day and night through harvest. The work was cutting dense cane under tropical sun with machetes, feeding stalks into rollers that crushed arms as readily as cane, and stirring boiling vats of syrup in open sheds hot enough to kill. No one would volunteer for it, so no one was asked. European planters had experimented with sugar and forced labor on Mediterranean and Atlantic islands for generations. But the machine reached full scale in 1493, when Christopher Columbus, on his second voyage, carried sugarcane to the Caribbean. The cane loved the Caribbean. And over the next 3.5 centuries, sugar became the engine of the largest forced migration in human history. The numbers are difficult to hold in your head, so hold just 2. Across the entire Atlantic slave trade, roughly 12.5 million Africans were forced onto ships. And of those who survived the crossing, historians estimate that far more went to sugar colonies than to any other destination. Millions to Brazil, millions more to the Caribbean islands. Not tobacco, not cotton, which came later. Sugar was the reason. The sweet crystal in the porcelain bowls of Europe was, ton for ton, the largest driver of slavery in the history of the world. And the sugar islands were not just brutal, they were consuming. On many Caribbean plantations, conditions were so lethal, the labor so destructive, disease so rampant, that enslaved populations died faster than children could be born. The plantation's answer was arithmetic: buy more people. Some planters openly calculated that working a human being to death and replacing them was cheaper than keeping them alive and well. An island like Jamaica or Saint-Domingue imported hundreds of thousands of people whose descendants, by rights, should have numbered millions, and did not. That missing arithmetic is sugar's true price sheet. Meanwhile, in Europe, sugar consumption exploded into tea, coffee, chocolate, jam, pastry, and almost nobody connected the sweetness on their table to the machinery producing it. An ocean is a very effective way to not see something. When British abolitionists finally forced the connection in the late 1700s, with pamphlets, with sugar boycotts, with the slogan that every pound of sugar contained a measure of human blood, hundreds of thousands of households gave up slave-grown sugar. It was one of the first consumer boycotts in history. The world's sweetest product became the birthplace of the idea that what you buy is a moral act. If you're enjoying this, take 1 second and hit subscribe. The Tiny Grand uncovers the grand hidden history of a tiny everyday thing every single week. Now, back to the story, because sugar was about to pull off its greatest escape. Slavery in the sugar colonies was eventually abolished, after rebellions, most spectacularly the revolution in Saint-Domingue, where the enslaved rose up and forged the nation of Haiti on the ashes of the richest sugar colony on earth. After decades of campaigning, and, we should say honestly, after plantation owners were paid handsome compensation for losing their property, while the freed received nothing. And you might expect that without slavery, sugar would become rare and expensive again. The opposite happened. because sugar had found a new accomplice, the machine, and a new plant. During the Napoleonic Wars, the British Navy blockaded France, cutting it off from Caribbean cane. Napoleon's response was to industrialize a discovery German chemists had made decades earlier, that an ordinary-looking root vegetable, the beet, could be bred to yield sugar, chemically identical sugar. Factories sprang up across Europe, and suddenly sugar didn't need the tropics at all. It could be grown in a cold field outside Paris or Berlin. Cane and beet, colony and factory, began racing each other, and the price of sugar collapsed. In 1 century, sugar completed the strangest journey any food has ever made, from the apothecary's shelf to the pauper's cup. By the late 1800s, sugar was the cheapest calorie in the industrial world. Factory workers in English cities lived on white bread, jam, and heavily sugared tea. Fast fuel for 14-hour shifts, hot and comforting and nutritionally hollow. Historians have argued that cheap sugar quietly subsidized the entire Industrial Revolution. It kept exhausted workers standing at their machines the way coal kept the machines turning. The substance that once decorated the tables of kings was now what the poorest ate instead of food. And then came the 20th century, when sugar stopped being something you added and became something that was added to you. Industrial food chemistry learned what sugar could do besides sweeten, hold moisture, extend shelf life, brown a crust, balance salt, mask bitterness. Sugar crept into bread, sauces, soups, cereals, yogurts, cured meats, foods you would never call sweet. New forms appeared, like high-fructose corn syrup, cheaper still. Consumption climbed to levels no human body had ever encountered. The average American went from a few pounds a year in the 1700s to dozens of pounds a year, much of it invisible, eaten without ever picking up a spoon. And when scientists began asking, in the mid-1900s, whether this unprecedented flood of sugar might have something to do with the unprecedented rise in heart disease, obesity, and diabetes, we arrive back where we started. The archive, the letters, the Harvard Review of 1967, quietly funded by the sugar industry, pointing the finger at fat. What followed was one of the great wrong turns in public health. For decades, official advice waged war on fat. The food industry responded with an armada of low-fat products and made them palatable by loading them with sugar. People who believed they were eating virtuously were often eating dessert. And the industry kept playing the same defense, funding friendly research, disputing hostile research, and, as journalists later uncovered, in 2015, a major soda company was found bankrolling a scientific nonprofit that promoted the message that exercise, not diet, was the real issue. The playbook the tobacco industry made famous, "Doubt is our product," was running on sugar too. In fairness, nutrition science is genuinely hard, and fat was never innocent either. But the thumb on the scale was real, it was paid for, and it lasted 50 years. Today, the world produces roughly 180 million tons of sugar a year. It is in an estimated 2/3 or more of packaged foods. And the ledger has come full circle in the most ironic way possible. Governments that once taxed sugar because it was a luxury now tax it because it is a danger. Dozens of countries have passed sugar taxes on soft drinks. The World Health Organization urges everyone to cut it. The crystal that entered Europe through the pharmacy door as medicine is exiting through the same door as warning label. So why does sugar always win? Because sugar isn't really fighting governments or doctors or boycotts. It's fighting your wiring, and it owns the terrain. For millions of years, Sweetness was evolution's rarest and most reliable signal. Ripe fruit, safe energy, eat now. Craving sugar kept your ancestors alive, precisely because they could almost never find much of it. Your brain still runs that ancient code. Reward sweetness, always. Ask questions, never. Sugar's entire history is the story of that Stone Age craving colliding with an industrial supply chain. Infinite want, meeting, for the first time, infinite supply. Empires, plantations, factories, marketing departments, all of them are just delivery systems built around a signal in your skull that cannot be switched off. Every other precious substance in history, gold, silk, spices, lost its grip when it became cheap. Sugar is the only one that became more powerful as it became worthless. Because its scarcity was never in the world, it was in you. Somewhere right now, a cane cutter in Brazil is swinging a machete through a field his great-grandparents might have worked without freedom. Somewhere, a food scientist is adjusting the sugar in a sauce recipe by 2 grams to hit what the industry calls the bliss point. Somewhere, a researcher is filing a study, and somewhere else, someone is quietly deciding who funds the next one. And somewhere in a library in California, those letters from 1967 sit in their boxes. A paper monument to the oldest rule in this story. The sweetness is always on the label, and the cost is always somewhere you're not looking. Tonight you will probably eat sugar without knowing it. It's in the bread, the sauce, the dressing, the drink. A crystal that was once locked in royal treasure rooms, that moved 12 million people in chains, that toppled colonies, fueled factories, and bent science itself, dissolved, invisible, in an ordinary Tuesday dinner. Not bad for a grass. If this story changed how you'll read your next food label, hit subscribe. The Tiny Grand tells the grand hidden history of a tiny everyday thing every week. And drop a comment with the food you'd bet has sugar hiding in it. The answers are going to surprise you.